back, Sheila. And, as usual, I keep saying this with almost all the interviews. So much has happened since the last time we talked. This is the quickening. We're having an acceleration of important events, not just events, but important events that are shaping the world and reshaping the geopolitical structures that run the world. And this Turkish situation and the British situation, these are, dire. The big stories and the big themes like the Clinton Foundation. The Clinton Foundation, in my opinion, is the source of the problem. And a lot of what's going on with Hillary requires those involved in the Clinton Foundation corruption to protect themselves and to protect their dog. Their dog is Hillary. And the Clinton Foundation, I think, involves something like 30 important offices of the U.S. government and maybe as many as 200 to 300 people, all skimming millions, if not billions, from peddling U.S. data, U.S. intelligence, U.S. weapons, U.S. uranium, and more. The Clinton Foundation is the entire nexus for the U.S. government systemic ingrained corruption. And that's why you will never see it prosecuted. For instance, Comey, the FBI director, he's not going to slam the Clinton Foundation. He was in charge of the HSBC legal staff in London,
right?
And they had to fend off the narcotics money laundering issues. So you can't have someone prosecute when that person is involved. So you're not going to see the Clinton Foundation fall apart. You're going to see the entire U.S. government and its debt situation and its currency structures all fall apart because of no remedy. And this is going to be tragic, and I hope we don't end up with a world war, and I think we're going to see a number of important collapses in the next several months. It's not probably going to happen in a way that many expect. I think we're going to start seeing more and more actual boycotts where nations say, we don't want your dollar. We don't want to be paid in your dollar. We don't want your treasury bond because you've turned it into a Zimbabwe currency. I just got an email. This is fascinating, Sheila, but I get contact us email, but I also get client and follower email. If someone sent me a few messages several months ago and not being a client, using Contact Us, the several responses I gave enabled the person to make a new comment to me directly with my email. I just got an email from somebody, I believe it was a client, and it was a client from North Dakota, It was about Bobcat Corporation, that makes they're not, I call them a small-time Caterpillar. They make industrial equipment like forklifts,
right,
and little scoopers, not for making roads, but for digging a trench where a sewer line's coming in. Okay, Bobcat. They're having a problem now. They have a parent organization in South Korea. So, we lost that company to an Asian larger company. Okay, well, more colonization. But the important point that was brought to my attention was Bobcat is now shipping in their machines, like the Bobcat scooper. But the point was that the shipped machinery coming into the West Coast is being held up. I don't mean like gunpoint and robberies. I mean it's being delayed to unload because they don't want treasury bills. We're getting concrete examples. A message to me came in. Jim, I heard you talk about how port facilities are seeing more and more examples of treasury bills being refused for payment. Here's a concrete example with Bobcat. Okay, this is one more. I think in the next several months, there'll be a dozen. They're starting to refuse treasury bonds as a legitimate form of money because we're printing it like Zimbabwe. We're calling it stimulus, Sheila.
Yeah.
It's not. It's killing capital, undermining the whole payment structure system, backdoor Wall Street bailouts for worthless, toxic impaired bonds that no one wants to buy.
Absolutely.
So where's the stimulus? It's not. It's contamination. So we're going to invite, and it's accelerating, the whole world. I'm looking for where the fractures are going to take place for bringing about the actual end to the global dollar. And I think it's going to be trade payments, and I'm now starting to think it's also going to be the Treasury bond complex itself.
Well, I don't have to tell you, Jim, this has been a wild year with, of course, we know gold up the most in 36 years. Probably the biggest year-to-date performance in 36 years has just occurred over the last few months. We've got mining shares in blast-off mode. I mean, what surprises you the most in this kind of short time period since about April?
Since April, I think the turns in Turkey and Germany. I'm focusing internationally a lot. I try to look a lot at what's going on in the bond market, the Treasury bond market. And now I'm starting to watch all the major bond markets. The German Bund has a problem. The British Gilt has a problem. The U.S. Treasury has a problem. But internationally, I think that the turning point, linchpin countries of Turkey and Germany are getting fed up with the U.S. masters. And this is what's surprising me. Bond markets, not just ours, but the sovereign major bond markets, and many call them vassal states, Japan, Germany, Turkey, they do what we tell them or we kill them.
Right.
The number of murders is astonishing. I mean, you can focus on the Hillary murders, and I think there's 6 since May, but very few people focus on the Brazil murder of Eduardo Campo a year and a half ago. He was a moderate presidential candidate that the U.S. did not want. So he had a small plane. He didn't get out of it because it crashed. And here's one of the telling indicators. There was a pro-Washington person, a Brazilian leader, who was going with Campo, and he decided at the last minute, might have been a woman, that person, that leader, decided at the last minute, no, not going on that flight. Why not? Change of plan. What kind of change of plan? We're not told. The plane crashed. Campo died. The other person didn't. Now that other person is vying for president of Brazil with U.S. blessing. These are the hints of a murder hit at the state level. And the U.S. is all over doing things. I think there have been about 30 key murders in the last 20 years in South America of just people who got in the way of the U.S. plans in our backyard. But I'm focusing on a lot of things, Sheila. I don't focus on everything. I don't have enough time. But I really think Turkey and Germany are turning points. Germany is going to be extraordinarily difficult for their leaders and their people and their industrial captains to change course.
Well, the American economy is living on borrowed time. I think we know that. We've got the infusion of massive amounts of printed out of thin air cash being printed by the Fed. I mean, anyone with an IQ above room temperature knows the inevitable economic crash is looming just on the horizon. We know the deficit's, $20 trillion, soon to be $21 trillion. And that's the good news. I mean, the unfunded liabilities debt is estimated to be $240 trillion. You look at the derivatives, we've been saddled with the burden of paying through the infamous bailouts. That's $1.5 quadrillion. I mean, it is really mind-numbing what's happened, isn't it?
It's mind-numbing, but when people ask me when do I think the crash is going to take place, I say right after the Lehman Brothers incident. We've been in crash mode for 8 years. You can say, well, we're heading toward a crash. No, I say we're in a crash. Would you like 20 examples? Take a look at the freight index, electricity usage. Take a look at my favorite economic statistic that's intentionally held back a lot. Corporation withheld income tax. You can't fudge that. Tax withholdings. You can't fudge it. You can't fake it. You can't say, well, wait a minute, we're going to do some adjustments on that. No, you just look at it from year to year, and it's gone down about 20% in the last several years. Okay, we're in a crash now. You take a look at, it's not just freight. Take a look at trucking
Yeah,
data.
listen, trucking, I'm so glad you brought that up. I was talking to a head of truck shipments in America, and he said shipments in June, Jim, were down so bad. He said it was absolutely mind-numbing. So I'm really glad you brought that up because they continue to dive, don't they?
They do, and it's evidence of the economy already in crash mode. You could take a look at container vessels. This is another favorite of mine. Containers on shipping vessels. They're way down. But here's the extraordinary statistic. Last year, 2015, the United States exported, back to Asian or emerging market nation ports, we exported 500,000 empty containers.
Wow.
To go back and get filled again. We don't make much here. We make, weapons. We make laced vaccines that contain the actual virus. We make fraudulent bonds. What do we make here? McDonald's? The Voice has a joke. He said, Jim, one of the major exports from the United States is diabetes.
McDiabetes. We're not loving it.
It's funny. I know it's funny, but what does that mean, Jim? Say the stupid guys in the corner. Well, it means that the fast food and the French fries are being exported all over the place by means of, the franchise. I mean, we used to have Wendy's here in Costa Rica. I didn't like their hamburgers. I liked their Frosty. They made a tremendous little milkshake that was chocolate and it had little, tiny micro ice bits in there. It was the best milkshake in all the town. They shut down all the Wendy's. But, we still got McDonald's. By the way, McDonald's in Costa Rica is far superior to the McDonald's elsewhere. Oh, they got much higher quality hamburger. They don't use,
human meat?
Well, beef bones and human parts. Okay, all right, we're getting off course here, but I truly believe Turkey is a gigantic turning point story. And I just, an hour ago finished a chapter that featured a lot of the Turkish-Russian interplay. The United States tried to get a coup. It wasn't just the United States. It was elements friendly to the United States that we're working with because we love terrorism so much in Washington. And this group, ISIS, is really good at it because we train them in the East Coast U.S. military bases. We don't just organize these people and fund them through, Saudi and Israeli sources and arm them. No, we bring them to the United States to train them. And Obama's being outed for this, and it's exciting to see. But we had a failed coup, and I forecasted 6 and 8 months ago a coup d'etat in the Turkish government. And I said the result will be the nation turns eastward. I didn't expect it to be a failed coup and Erdogan to turn eastward with an apology and olive branch to the Kremlin. I didn't expect that. I just expected the main elements, a coup and a turn east, and we got it.
Well, and then Turkey's threatened to back out of an agreement to stem the flow of migrants to the European Union if Turkish nationals aren't granted visa-free travel to the bloc. So, in other words, Europe's trapped kind of in a no-win situation. Europe officials are saying that although Turkey's fulfilled most of these conditions, it's failed to relax the most stringent anti-terrorism laws. So essentially, and I was looking at this really interesting German newspaper article on Friday, and it has this confidential plan to house all migrants arriving from Turkey on Greek islands. Like, there's a lot of shady shenanigans going on in Turkey, isn't there?
There is, and I think Putin is like the big guy coming up with some industrial cleaners and brooms. He's coming in there, and he is ISIS' worst enemy.
Yeah.
And by cleaning up so much in Syria, he's exposed the United States. And very few Americans know this. But in the last September G20 meeting, Putin gave a PowerPoint show of the complex financing pathways for ISIS. and they're all from Israel and the Swiss banks. Not get any press in the United States. Putin in the G20 exposed the West as being funding agents for ISIS and the terrorism. And furthermore, John McCain got his email hacked. In the hacking came a lot of different emails, messages to ISIS leaders and coordination for the phony videos. So the U.S. is getting outed by Putin. Here's what I think Putin did with Erdogan. And I don't care about correctly pronouncing Erdogan or Incirlik, the Air Force base for NATO. I think Putin made Erdogan an offer. If you make an apology and you make it sincere and you work toward constructive methods with your country and Russia, we'll repair all this. We'll deal with whatever comes from the United States in regards to terrorism, destabilization, head of state assassinations, financial market turmoil, currency sales, whatever. We'll deal with all that. But turn east and we'll take care of you because we have a longer history between Russia and Turkey than Turkey does with Europe. Erdogan said, I'm there, I'll do it, and he did. And I believe one of the big conditions by Putin was turn your back on ISIS, wash your hands, they're dirty. And I think Erdogan said, okay, Turkey is going to wash its hands of ISIS. And again, Americans do not seem to comprehend. The ISIS field headquarters for logistics and battle controls are in the U.S. Embassy in Ankara, Turkey. We're again violating protocol for another embassy. We violated protocol in Libya. How'd that turn out? We're violating it in Turkey. We're also using the Air Force base as a center for an attempted coup, coordinating with the cleric in the Poconos of Pennsylvania named Gulen, or I don't care how you pronounce his name. It looks like G-U-L-E-N, Gulen. Okay. Turkey is flipping east right now. And the big issue that I see is what's going to happen with the nukes. And it looks like the U.S. has already handled that. We've moved them to other East European locations like Bulgaria and Poland, which really don't know what devil they're dealing with. The other big issue regarding Turkey is what's going to happen with all the heroin that is shipped from the U.S.-sponsored production plants in Afghanistan, responsible for between 80 and 90% of the world's heroin, including the heroin that involved my niece recently in an overdose. What's going to happen with all the heroin that the U.S. sends through Kosovo to Turkey from Afghan origins? And I think the U.S. is going to solve that easily by just using and abusing the Ramstein base in Germany. This is so perverse. I just had a conversation face-to-face with a client a few weeks ago, and the person said to me, Jim, I want to tell you a story about my son. This fellow was in his 60s. That's my age. So my guess is it had to be someone about his same age. I think it was his brother or brother-in-law, something like that. Anyway, let's just call it his brother. He said, my brother served at an Air Force base in Thailand during the Vietnam War. And I said, oh, that must have been interesting. A lot of movement of dangerous weapons and ordnance that ended up in Cambodia and Laos. And he said, oh, yeah, but the point of my story, Jim, is that the Air Force base, I can't remember the name of it, he said it's a gigantic Air Force base the U.S. runs in Thailand, very near I think the Laotian border. I'm not sure of the geography there, but very close for all the runs. And he said this Thailand base had a distinction. They handled the dead bodies. And I knew where he was going to go with this. I said, oh, yeah, 100 pounds of heroin in every coffin. He said, exactly. Every coffin had 100 pounds of heroin. He said, here's some of the other little signals that are so important on the detail side. He said, imagine, moving a coffin. You'd think, well, they get the privates and the grunts and the sergeants and get them all there working up a sweat in the Thailand sun. He said, no. You had to be captain or higher to even be in a certain region, a certain area of the Air Force Base that handled the coffins. I said, why was that? And he said, because they're loading in the heroin.
Wow.
100 pounds per coffin. And he said, he said it was a real shock because my brother occasionally wandered where he wasn't supposed to, just going for a walk, and he got stopped by some colonel. I said, what are you doing here? And he said, I'm just going for a walk. He turned around. This is a restricted area. Why is a coffin area restricted? And they say, well, it's respect to the families involved so that there's no desecration of bodies. 100 pounds of heroin. Then he went on to say, Jim, did you ever see the movie with Russell Crowe, the Australian, and Denzel Washington about the Thailand Air Force Base? I said, no, I missed that one. I see a lot of movies. I did not see that Denzel Washington movie. He said, Denzel acted as a ranking U.S. Army military officer.
Oh, American Gangster.
American Gangster, yes, that was it. Yeah. Yes. And he said that's where the heroin came from, that they loaded 100 pounds per coffin. And I said to him, that's a real reason not to dislike a lot of casualties. And we only had 50,000. Gosh, we could have had more. And he said, yeah, and beware that it was the lower class that largely died in Vietnam. The point is, Turkey has nukes. They're being moved to Eastern European, other locations. Turkey has a lot of heroin moving through it, going to the other Western European cities and countries where they have significant income and drug problems. I think that's going to be all rerouted through Germany's Ramstein base. And I made some comments in a recent interview, and I got some more Contact Us commentary from a very smart German fellow. And he said, Jim, the part about Germany you may not fully appreciate is that the centers of power in the German government and hierarchy are all subservient to Washington. He said, I'm referring to the Chancellor's office, that's the president.
Yeah.
I'm referring to their intelligence network, their press networks, and certain members of the parliament. They're all beholden to Washington with loyalty oaths that supersede their oath to serve in the German political offices. So we've made Germany a vassal state. It's going to be very difficult for it to uproot. And I made the comment that the industrial captains are just going to ignore the political leadership. And he said that could very well happen. He said, I liked your term of industrial captains. It's the executives, the ones who are trying to maintain business course, trying to keep the export trade strong, trying not to lose their Russian business to China.
While Europe is on the brink of a financial meltdown, we see banks are charging customers, Jim, to hold their cash in negative interest rate. I mean, what kind of world is that? You've got Euro area shutdowns, putting onuses on Germany as Brexit risks gather. Of course, we see that. You see these Swiss partners, these offshore wind farms. I mean, it's just a gong show in Europe, isn't it?
It is. I'd like to make some comments about the negative interest rate.
Yes, please.
I mean, I made a name for myself in a certain way back in 2003 before the Hat-Trick Letter when I wrote a 4-part series called Ass Backwards Economics to point out how U.S. economic policy is very destructive, how things are not working as we want, and how propaganda is used to falsely describe what we're doing so people don't understand. But the negative interest rate, I think, is far more complex than we're told. Why do the bankers do that? What do the bankers say for their motive to have a negative interest rate? They actually say, we're trying to push money out of the safe haven of the banks so that it'll go out into the economy and be productive with business capital and plant and equipment, buying things, starting businesses. Well, if that's the case, why don't the banks lend more to the commercial sector? There's the contradiction. They don't. So their reason of pushing money out of the idle safe haven into the capitalist centers is a lie. They don't lend themselves. So why are they claiming that that's the motive? Well, if that's the motive, they should be working more toward commercial lending. Should they not? This is a basic contradiction that, again, the low IQ types that run around so commonly in our country don't focus on. I'm not one of them. I've got a 3-digit IQ. Okay, so there's more to it. What is the motive? I did my dismissal. These are the reasons why I don't think we're having the negative interest rates. Well, what are they for? Okay, take a look now. Focus attention on the spread. The spread from the 10-year bond down to, say, the lower level maturities. And it gets kind of complex because U.S. Treasury bonds are not really negative, but they're near zero, and they're so close to zero that I just call them zero. But why would the banks want